Hey, it's another devlog. You know something that's always a good idea and never has any downsides? An in-game chat system. I found that players are always civilized and well-mannered and always good sports about it, whether they win or lose. So I'm gonna add a chat system to my game, because it's such a common thing that you'd find in multiplayer games, and you find it in every game, from Rocket League to World of Warcraft. I don't know, it just kinda made sense to add it to my game too. So I added this chat box here where players can send their own messages through, and communicate with whoever their opponent is. And then I had the idea to have the chat system receive messages that happen throughout the match, like characters dealing and taking damage, or maybe your opponent using certain cards, and the text colors change depending on the team. And then at some point this week I had some random impulse to try and change the environmental effects a little bit. I discovered a sway shader on Reddit, and I wanted to implement it and see how it worked in my game. And it looks alright, but I guess we'll see. Then a big step I had to take this week was making sure that the single player button worked. Now with the new AI in place, the single player might actually be an option. So the idea is that when you hit the single player button, it should load you into a random map, which right now there's only one, and assign you a random AI opponent to face. But it didn't start off too well. But after a lot of tinkering, I got it to work, with seemingly no errors. And now the player does what I just said. They load into a new map, and start against a random AI opponent with their own preset deck. And on their turn, the AI should react how I programmed them in the last video. So other than the 1000 bugs that we're bound to find, the single player is working. Next, I worked on making it more apparent whenever a character fell under an elemental effect like poison. So I added this burst poison effect that slows over time when he first gets poisoned, just to try and signal the player that he did in fact get poisoned. And then I did the same thing with the fire effect, because those are the only two elements that I have right now. Then one thing I had to double check was I had to make sure that the AI didn't spawn in when you went into a multiplayer match. And I found this. Fixed it. So now it works about how it's supposed to, and I'm only a little bit scared of it. The next thing I changed was the tooltip. I made it so instead of just saying weapon, for example, it'll actually give you the name of the weapon equipped. Now I understand while editing this video that the changes I made to the game this week are all over the place. I guess I just felt like doing a bunch of tidy work. And that leads into the biggest change that I made for this week, adding affinities and spell cards, or ability cards. An idea I had from the start was that if I was going to have magic in the game, I needed some way to amplify magic damage, as opposed to just a sword that would do a base damage. In other words, if a player went for a fire build on a character, I wanted some way for them to amplify that fire damage. And I also want them to get new abilities like a fireball ability that they can shoot. So my solution was to add 2 affinities, and all things magic would be based off these 2 affinities. So fire and lightning attacks would scale with the destruction ability. So here you can see an example of this in action. I amplified the character's destruction ability and also gave him a poison sword. So the poison sword should do more damage if he has a higher destruction ability. And now that that's working, I need to add spells and abilities into the game. But first I needed to plan for how the spells would be used, and I felt the best way to do that was to add a button that reveals all your abilities, kind of like a show attacks button. And so now I can give the character this new temporary fireball ability that I made, and the ability will show up under the spells option. And if I were to give the character another ability, even the same one, they should both be shown. Most abilities will have cooldowns, so for now I'm making it so that the player can equip 2 of the same spell, maybe as a strategy to avoid a cooldown. And now here, if the player has an ability and they select it, they can then select an opponent to use it on. So for my fireball here, I'll select the opponent, and it should shoot out a new fireball object I made, and do damage based on their destruction affinity. And as a better example of how the affinities will work, I gave the character a higher destruction affinity for shooting his fireball, and you can see it amplified the damage quite a bit. And I think this adds a lot more opportunity for making character builds. Only one more technical change I had to make with the fireball. The fireball should obviously have a chance to burn its opponent. So because I added the luck stat in the previous video, I was able to implement a luck roll into this attack. So if the player hits that roll, then the fireball would burn the opponent. And I plan to add things that would change this later. For example, an offhand item that maybe makes all fire attacks have a guaranteed burn instead of being based off luck. Or maybe having an offhand item that makes it so that all fire damage is increased by 1. There's a lot of options, and that's what I initially had in mind with the offhand, instead of it just being a basic shield or something, which is also an option. I wanted it to add a little bit more variation to the spell abilities, or just magic builds in general. I made some final touches to the UI. It now shows you what spell you have active, and you can switch between them with ease, so long as they're not on cooldown. And then I designed a new spell card, which looks just like all the other cards, but it's purple. I don't know if I'm going to keep the purple look, but for now it looks different enough where you can recognize it easily in your hand. So I'll leave it like that. It's very easy to change later on if I choose to. And the function should be the same as most of the other cards. You just drag it over a character, and as long as that character is on your team, then it should equip them with a new ability. So now testing to make sure that it works, you can see here that the character has no current ability, and so the option for spells isn't even there. If I were to grab this new fireball card and drag it over my character, I should have the option to use it and then give him a brand new fireball spell. Now he does have the option for a new ability, and if he has the energy remaining to use it, he can cast his fireball on an opponent. And as another test, I changed one of the current items so that it now gives an unreasonable boost to luck and affinity, destruction affinity to be specific. And if I equip the character with this overpowered card, they should deal a decent chunk of damage and have enough luck to have a guaranteed burn effect. And the final change I made was making it so that spells have a range. When you click on an ability that has a ranged attack, it'll now show you this absolutely terrible looking chunk of hexes that you can choose from, and anything within that range that's attackable should be able to be attacked. It looks awful right now, but I'll change it later. And that's all for this devlog update. If you made it this far, thanks for watching. And if you like the game and you haven't already subscribed, do it. Or not, up to you really. And just as a heads up, I think I'm going to start taking a little bit more time in between each video. That way I can take my time a little bit more and maybe make them better quality. Maybe make them feel less like a play-by-play. But hopefully I'll see you all in the next one.